Imagine pouring your heart and soul into starting a new community, only to be violently chased out of town, leaving you totally in the dark about what happened to them. Well, that is the very real anxiety at the heart of this letter, written almost 2,000 years ago by a man named Paul to a group of new believers in a city called Thessalonica. So today, we're going to unpack their incredible story. Right out of the gate, Paul doesn't just say hi. He drops this bombshell. He tells this brand new community, just a few months old, that they've already become the gold standard for faith across the entire region. Now, that isn't just a compliment. It's a huge sign that something truly special was going on in Thessalonica. So that's the central puzzle of this letter, isn't it? Who were these people that got this amazing reputation so fast? And if they were doing so great, why on earth was the guy who started it all so worried that all his hard work might have been for nothing? Okay, so let's start with the Thessalonians themselves. Who were they? Well, their whole identity was forged in this radical public change that completely redefined them in front of everybody they knew. And this right here is the absolute core of it. It was a total 180. See, in a world that was jam-packed with temples and statues to all sorts of gods, they made a conscious decision to turn away from those idols and serve who Paul calls the living and true God. This wasn't some private, personal belief. It was a public statement that immediately set them apart from their entire culture. But here's the thing. This incredible reputation wasn't built when things were easy. Oh, no. Paul makes it crystal clear that they embraced this new way of life with joy in spite of facing intense persecution. So their faith wasn't just holding on. It was actually thriving. It was, as he says, sounding forth, so loudly that their story was spreading all on its own. So, if they're this massive success story, where does all the worry come from? Well, that's where we get to Paul's side of the story. You see, he wasn't there to witness any of this firsthand. He'd been run out of the city. Here's the quick backstory. Paul shows up, he establishes this community, but the local opposition gets so hostile, he literally has to flee for his life. So now he's far away, unable to go back, and he's just left wondering, did they survive? Did the pressure crush them? He can't stand it, so he sends his friend Timothy back on a pretty risky trip just to see if their faith is still intact. This letter we're reading, it's Paul's immediate reaction to what Timothy told him. And you can just feel the raw emotion in his own words here. He says he could no longer endure it. He was genuinely terrified that the persecution had been too much, that they'd given up, and that everything he'd worked for, everything they'd all suffered for, would be in vain. The stakes just felt enormous to him. And this is because it wasn't just some professional relationship. It was intensely personal. I mean, listen to how Paul talks about them. He says he felt like a nursing mother caring for them. He calls them his glory and joy. And you know what? The feeling was mutual. Timothy told him they were greatly desiring to see him again too. And then, the big turning point. Timothy gets back, and the news is good. Actually, it's better than good. It's fantastic. He tells Paul their faith is solid, their love for each other is strong, and yes, they really miss him. You can almost hear Paul's sigh of relief. He's overjoyed. But Timothy's report also brought up a few things, some questions this new community was wrestling with that needed answers. So, with that huge weight off his shoulders, Paul pivots. The relief is there, but he knows they need guidance. So his tone shifts from being this worried parent to being a teacher, and he starts laying out some practical guidelines for how to live this new life. The big idea that underpins all of his instructions is this word right here, sanctification. He says, this is the will of God, your sanctification. Now, that's a theological sounding word, but all it really means is a call to live a life that's set apart, a life that looks holy, honorable, and completely different from the world around them. So what does that look like day to day? Well, Paul gets super practical. He talks about sexual integrity, which was a massive departure from the culture at the time. He tells them to keep growing in their love for one another. And then he gives this really interesting advice. Aim for a quiet life, mind your own business, and work with your hands. He wanted them to be a stable, respectable, self-sufficient community that earned the respect of outsiders. But there was one issue that was much deeper than just lifestyle advice. It was a question that came from a place of grief and real fear. You see, some people in their little community had already died, and the ones left behind were heartbroken and confused. This was the question that was keeping them up at night. They had this vibrant hope that Jesus was coming back, but now they were terrified that their loved ones who had already passed away were going to miss out. Paul says they were starting to sorrow as others who have no hope, and he just couldn't let that happen. So to counter their fear, he paints this incredible, almost cinematic picture of the future. He says, "Don't you worry about the dead. They don't miss out. In fact, they get to go first." He describes the Lord descending, the dead in Christ rising, and then the living being caught up together with them to meet the Lord. The most important part of this whole vision, it's about reunion. Everyone is together again. And that brings us to the whole point. Why did Paul share this vision? It wasn't to create some complex end times chart. Nope. He shared it for one simple, powerful reason, so they could comfort each other. These words were meant to be a direct source of hope for their grief. Okay, so if that's the ultimate hope waiting for them, how is that supposed to change the way they live right now, in the messy present? Well, that's exactly where Paul finishes his letter, with some really urgent advice for living in the meantime. He tells them they don't need to get obsessed with calendars and dates, but what they do need to understand is the nature of this thing he calls the day of the Lord. It's not going to be announced with a countdown. It's going to show up suddenly, unexpectedly, just, he says, as a thief in the night. And because of that, Paul lays out two totally different ways you can live your life. You can be like children of darkness, basically spiritually asleep, totally unaware, and you'll be caught completely off guard. Or, he says, you can be children of light, awake, sober, clear-headed, and ready. It's a call to live with your eyes wide open. Then he closes with this rapid-fire list of commands. First up, rejoice always. Now think about that. For a community facing constant affliction, this sounds almost impossible. But it's not about faking a smile. It's about grounding your joy in that future hope, which is bigger than any present suffering. Next, he says, pray without ceasing. This doesn't mean you have to be on your knees 24/7. It's about living in a constant state of awareness of God, making your whole life a kind of running conversation. And finally, this gem, hold fast what is good. He actually tells them to test everything first. He wants them to be thinkers, to be discerning, to check things out, and then to grab on tight to whatever proves to be genuinely good. And really, that's what this ancient letter is all about. It's a snapshot of a community whose hope for the future wasn't some escape hatch from their problems. No, that hope was the very thing that fueled them to live in the present with joy, love, and a kind of resilience that made them an example for everyone. Which leaves us with the exact same question they had to answer. How does a powerful vision of the future change how we live today?